The Justice Department released thousands of files Friday from its investigation into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. This even as it acknowledged that its documents disclosure about the wealthy financier, known for his connections to President Donald Trump and other influential people, was incomplete. Along with court records and other already public material, the Justice Department released nearly 4,000 files under a subset it described as DOJ Disclosures, including disclosures required by the recently passed Epstein Files Transparency Act. The vast majority of those records, almost 80%, were photographs of FBI searches of Epstein's homes in New York City and on Little St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands. There were nearly 1,500 photos from the FBI's searches of Epstein's Manhattan townhouse around the time of his arrest in July 2019, and more than 1,600 of the Little St. John property from searches conducted on August 12, 2019, 2 days after Epstein's death in a federal jail. Other photos released by the Justice Department were put out without context or explanation, making it difficult to determine what relevancy, if any, the images had to the criminal investigations. The release seemed to be a thin slice of the total documents the Department of Justice is expected to have. DOJ authorities acknowledged in a letter to Congress obtained by the Associated Press that the complete files were not released, and the government expects more disclosures by the end of the year. Among the thousands of records released are photos, call logs, grand jury testimony, and interview transcripts. Many of the documents have been redacted, and at least some have already been in the public domain. The White House said the release of the files, mandated by a law passed by Congress, shows how the Trump administration is the most transparent in history.
So President Trump signed a law in mid-November that required the Department of Justice to release all the Epstein files by midnight on Friday, December 19th. The deadline was set by the law that the president signed and that Congress had passed. Department of Justice is saying we may not get all the files released by midnight on December 19th. We may be handing out files over the next several weeks, and that's certainly contrary to what the law required. The problem is the law didn't have any enforcement teeth in it. There was nothing in the law that said, if that doesn't happen by midnight on December 19th, this is the penalty, this is the punishment. So they're not required to release a list of what they're not releasing. And that's where the problems arise. And that's where the suspicion would continue to grow, because we don't know what we don't know about the documents that were kept back. And so it's up to the Department of Justice. It's basically the honor system saying, okay, these materials relate to victims, so they're kept back. These materials relate to ongoing prosecution, so they're kept back. But again, it's up to the people who are making those decisions to say whether or not those exceptions follow the law. So it's not going to reassure a lot of people that this has been done scrupulously and appropriately, because there's going to be so much material that's not being released, so much material that's redacted, that it's certainly going to feed suspicions that something's going on. But on the other hand, there's not much that the Congress can do to enforce this. Now, there have been claims and reports that some members of Congress want to initiate impeachment proceedings against the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, in the case that there's material that should be released that hasn't been released. That's really the only teeth available to Congress if the law is not complied with. So when it comes down to it, the idea that this is bipartisan may go by the wayside, because you've got, while Epstein certainly associated with both prominent Democrats and prominent Republicans, including ex-presidents like Bill Clinton and current presidents like Donald Trump, if it becomes a partisan issue, that's certainly going to raise suspicions that materials not being released, materials being withheld, and the basis for that is not protecting victims' names. The basis for it is protecting the reputations of prominent people in both parties. Right. Well, part of the law also establishes that redactions can't be made for the purposes of sparing people embarrassment. That's one of the key elements of the law. It was explicit in the law that Congress passed and that the president signed. So the Department of Justice cannot use reputational harm or embarrassment as a basis for redacting any material. The problem with redactions, it's one thing to look at a page that comes from the DOJ files and you see a name blanked out or two names blanked out. But when you see page after page of dark lines where there's nothing communicated on that page except the redaction, it does raise questions about, it's one thing to redact names, it's one thing to redact victim identities. It's another thing when the material that you're looking at has been blacked out to the point where it's useless because it doesn't have any information on it whatsoever. So there are always going to be arguments about what was redacted. There's always going to be suspicion, especially around the Epstein case, especially around any big document dump that includes nothing but blacked out pages, because that's not going to look like it's transparent. It's going to look like somebody's trying to hide something.
Just put out the files and stop redacting names that don't need to be redacted. It's just, who are we trying to protect? Are we protecting the survivors, or are we protecting these elite men that need to be put out there? And people need to know these are predators that are in the files. They need to be brought to justice so they can stop doing this in the long run. It's for everyone's safety at the end of the day. I haven't gone through all of it, so I don't want to speak, I don't want to say the wrong things, but I do understand that also a lot of important, people have been redacted from it. And the whole process of being transparent was to only redact the survivors and the victims' names. So here we are right where we started with the first files. These names that need to be put out there, people need to know about these people, have been redacted. So it's a little bit confusing. I feel like, again, the DOJ, the justice system, is failing us. In the beginning, they were calling us a hoax, right? They were like saying that we were a hoax. And now they're like, we believe you, we're going to release the files. But yet you still haven't released the files, and it's not even full transparent. So it's very nice to say it, but it's also nice to actually do it.
The Epstein files have been released, well, at least some of them. The Justice Department on Friday posting several categories of documents to its website relating to the late financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Those categories include court records and other disclosures made under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a law enacted last month that carves out an exception to many of the laws that had put a veil of secrecy over these court records, grand jury records, and investigative materials from the many years of investigations into Jeffrey Epstein and his longtime confidant and former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. So far, we're seeing lots of photographs, call logs, material from grand juries that investigated Epstein and Maxwell, as well as files from civil lawsuits and other litigation involving Epstein. So the big questions are, what names are in here and in what context? And context is critical to understanding what is in these records. You may see a name like Donald Trump or Bill Clinton, but sometimes, as we've seen in the past, it's merely somebody discussing the presidential campaign or discussing a news article related to President Trump. There are other examples that we've seen in the past where people have talked about interacting with a famous person, but those people not being accused of any wrongdoing. And indeed, some people who have accused Epstein and Maxwell of wrongdoing have not accused Trump or Clinton or any of the other famous names of misbehavior. And now we await reaction not only from the White House, but also from people on all sides of this story. People who have accused Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell of wrongdoing, people who have been in their orbits, people who maybe are mentioned in these records but have not been accused of any wrongdoing, and their only association is some other relationship with Epstein or Maxwell. Lots of anticipation, and now the hard work begins of really digesting and understanding what is in these records.